All right, it's now recording. And we are going to talk about school placements as it's loading here. So let's have some time for some question and answers for anybody that may want to bring that up to the group, as well as some school supports. We're going to go through some of the classroom categories, and some of this is CPS specific because most of our clients do come from CPS district. However, many other schools also operate in the same kind of categories and placements for your kids, and these would be found within about the last section of the IEP where it goes over school placements. So the first one, and this is in order of restrictiveness. So first and foremost, we always want to look at the least restrictive environment for our clients to ensure that they are still accessing general education curriculum to the extent that they can, as well as not putting them into a very restrictive setting that doesn't allow for them to have access to that curriculum, as well as their peers and things like that that may be of the same age. So the first placement that they will consider is general education classrooms. And this is, your neurotypical classroom, bigger classrooms, up to 20, 25 kids, one teacher. This is without supports. So your child would be flying solo within this classroom. Many of the times what general education classroom looks like is that your kid is acting at the same level as their peers and does not need any support or modifications to the curriculum. So they're able to understand, second grade math, second grade reading, and things like that. The next level is general education classrooms with supports and or modifications. So looking at providing a peer professional to help them within the classroom, whether that is to ensure the safety of themselves or others if they engage in behaviors, or maybe they try to elope from the classroom. So the second level of restrictiveness is looking at being in the general education classroom, but they have some support and or modifications made to the curriculum to ensure that they're able to access that general education classroom to the fullest extent. The next one, which is, I don't want to say pretty popular, but this one is where you'll see some of our kids located, is a combination between general education classrooms and special education classrooms. So maybe they join general education classrooms for specials like art, music, PE, or things like that. Or maybe they're also in general education classrooms because they're reading at the same level as that grade. Or maybe they're able to comprehend the math concepts that are within that grade, and they don't need to be placed into a special education classroom to receive extra help and assistance with it. Whereas the other parts of time that they're spending their day is within a special education classroom, so that they're able to access educational curriculum that is at their level with modification and support within that special education classroom. The next level of restrictiveness is looking at self-contained special education classes. So this is what CPS calls a cluster program. So these are classrooms that are primarily just special education. So they generally do not go too often to gen ed classrooms, or maybe they go there for like one or two specials, but they spend a majority of their time in a self-contained special education classroom where the peers that they are accessing are those that also share special education services or disability of some nature. The next level of restrictiveness is therapeutic school placements. These are private day schools, so they're not within CPS. Like CPS tuitions kids out to go to these therapeutic school placements. So they've gone through the levels of restrictiveness, and the IEP team has determined that the best placement for them is to be placed into a therapeutic school placement. I'll go into this in a little bit in another slide as to what that looks like and how that process goes. The next level of restrictiveness is residential care or treatment facilities. Now, remember that IDEA serves children not only with special education needs, but also other disabilities, other health impairments, and things like that, emotional behavior disturbance, things that are, not necessarily all autism. Although our population here at the clinic and at the academy are primarily children with autism, IDA serves a breadth of disabilities. And so residential care, such as, being placed out of state to receive both home and school supports, are reserved specially for those children and teenagers who, are not able to function well within a therapeutic school placement. Their life is endangering them in terms of the level of behaviors that they engage in towards themselves or others. So they need to look at a residential care facility, or maybe it is looking at mental health and they need to be placed into a treatment facility. I'm going to also send this document to you guys as well so that you can look over it. But this document is on the CPS website in terms of, frequently asked questions with regards to school assignment. And school assignment is basically just looking at, where is my kid going to school? What does that look like within the IEP? So they have a nice document that kind of goes through some questions that you may have for yourself as to what it looks like for school placement within CPS. Many times, the school assignment is determined first by looking at the neighborhood school. So this is the school that is closest to your home, and determining whether or not an IEP can be implemented there. So a lot of times, many parents are looking, to move. Say that you're in an apartment and you're looking to buy a house. Many people will come to me and say, where should I move? What's the best neighborhood for me to ensure that my kid, receives the best services, and, my kid the best? What school should I, align myself with? Unfortunately, and the same goes for even our suburban schools and things like that have multiple elementary schools, you could move into, the best neighborhood, but if that neighborhood school is not equipped with the ability to implement your child's IEP, the district will find another school within its district boundaries to kind of help with that implementation of that IEP. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind if you are looking to move in the upcoming year, or, sometime in the near future, that your child's school assignment is based solely on what is in the IEP and what, school placement is going to best be able to implement all portions of that IEP. And if they're not able to do it at your child's home, again, they'll find other schools that are close still within, reach of you, but that may, result in your child needing to be bused to and from the school. And they do have transportation written into the IEP as to what that exactly looks like. There's other questions in here, like, why isn't the school that's closest to me, my child able to go there, even though I think they can implement the IEP? What if it's, different from last year? Why is that happening? Obviously, there are different changes, going on within school systems with regards to schools being open for this school year, but next year they may be closed, or the population and their abilities to serve different types of IEPs may be changing. So unfortunately, each year it may look like your school placement may change. For most of my clients that I've worked with throughout this process, usually once they start at a school, they stay at a school. Like, I haven't encountered too often that the school is now magically closed and we need to find a different placement, or, we went there this year, but next year we're not going to be there. One thing that I do know happens quite frequently is extended school year. So if your child is eligible to receive extended school year services during the summer, for those 6-week periods, generally they will be assigned to a different school. And that is only because each school they contract with in terms of who is going to be the summer school site for that school year. That may also mean that you'll have a different teacher, different speech, OT, PT, social work. All of those services may be different over the summer. So your team may change during the summer. So that happens very frequently, in which your child goes to, one neighborhood school or one school during the fall and spring, but during the summer, during the extended school year, they may change just because of how, the rotation of the schools that are open for extended school years. They also will provide transportation services for children who are eligible for those transportation services. But do know that the transportation services is not under CPS. CPS contracts with a bus company to help implement that portion of the IEP. So if there's transportation issues, it has to go directly to that bus company versus CPS. And it does take quite a while at times for them to set up and get the transportation started and confirmed and everything. So I always tell parents that we have to show a little grace, a little patience during that time period, and just keep, prompting and asking, when is this starting? So initially in the beginning, you may have to figure out transportation for your child to and from school while they get that set up. Generally at the beginning of the school year, like if you have your IEP right now and they know that your child is going to be eligible for busing services in the fall, there shouldn't be too much of an issue to get that set up. Most of the time that I see that happening is those mid-year shifts where a child gets their IEP in December, parents accept placement to start in January. There's a little bit of a delay in getting that transportation started because it's a brand new client that's hopping on to an existing school year. And then that's all in Spanish too. So in case you need that, there's also references in Spanish for school assignment FAQs. And again, I'll send that all to you guys so you have access to it. As I mentioned before, we always want to look for the least restrictive environment. So IDA is big on, making sure that every child is placed into that LRE and that they have access, even if it's slightly, to the general education curriculum, the environment, the peers that are within that environment. The absolute least restrictive environment is that general education classroom without support. So again, they're flying solo within the class. Think of it as your typical, kid classroom. That's what you're looking at for the very least restrictive environment. But it's also important to note that having a one-to-one support system in place, as well as modifications and accommodations in a general education classroom, is more restrictive than being solo in a special education classroom, because having a one-to-one is more restrictive. You have somebody that's there to, shadow you, keep you safe, keep everybody else safe, tell you what to do, make sure that you're following instructions and things like that, versus you being able to do that on your own, which is more independence, more ability to, access things in your classroom on your own versus relying on somebody else sitting next to you or even a shared person helping you throughout the day. That part is a lot more restrictive. It is much more common for them to have a shared paraprofessional. And what a shared paraprofessional looks like is that you're within a classroom setting and you will, as well as your child, will share a paraprofessional with another child in the classroom. Some of the times you'll see this for like toileting, for, feeding routines or things like that, like heating up their lunches or transitioning in a hallway if your child is not a huge eloper, but there's still, some safety concerns, they might have a shared aid. One thing to note, I will put this out here about shared peer professionals, that I always try to make mention at an IEP that if a child does have a shared paraprofessional, I would like for teachers to take data on how it's being utilized, how much time is being utilized with the shared paraprofessional, and if the shared paraprofessional is spending more time with your child versus another child, because then it will, look at the allocation of those resources and that shared support to better determine if your child needs more paraprofessional support than what's being written in the IEP, or maybe this other child is missing out because they're, spending more time with your child, which is totally fine. But also, if we're using a shared paraprofessional, you want to make sure that the resources are balanced out and not one person is using more than the other, because that points out that there's a bigger need for both of the kids, far more than what a shared paraprofessional can provide. So sometimes you will see what's called a shared paraprofessional. Dedicated means that child has their one-to-one and that person is with them at all points in time. Oh, segueing right into paraprofessional support. I will say this, although lately it's been a lot easier to obtain through CPS, but historically it has been a challenge. And I really honestly, the only thing that I can think of is who is your case manager. I don't have a list of names of like this case manager is more, heavy and more open to providing paraprofessional support than this one. I think it all just depends on who it is and, the story that you're telling and the data that you provide to show the need for paraprofessional support. Historically, many times they will err on the side of caution and provide paraprofessional support more so for children that have extreme behavioral issues. That's been reported to me from case managers that they have been told it is quote unquote policy that children that have extreme or severe behaviors are the ones that will be receiving paraprofessional support over children that, need some support to just initiate, attend, respond to instructions being provided. So more so you'll see paraprofessional support being provided for behavioral reasons versus your child needs it because, they sit in a chair, but they're not really listening to the teacher. So that's why I said this support will not be provided for students who need prompting to initiate, attend, or complete tasks or activities because historically CPS has not provided it. Lately, I have been noticing through the IEP process with a few of our clients that we have been able to successfully show proof and guidance as to what type of paraprofessional support they would need. Even if it's shared paraprofessional support, we've been able to show that they do need it to, sit in a chair, attend, and complete tasks because they're unable to do it due to getting up and leaving the, desk quite frequently and things of that nature. At times, like I said before, shared paraprofessional support will be providing IEPs to assist with toileting needs or other specific needs that are not across long periods of time. So if your child needs just a little bit of help in the bathroom, but they're not completely independent, and this would be far outside of what the teacher would be able to do because the teacher is trying to lead a classroom, and your child needs to take a toileting break, but they're not completely independent and rely on some prompting to get through the process, shared paraprofessional would probably be provided so that that person can step out of the classroom to assist your child in the bathroom. Same thing for lunch routines. Often you'll find paraprofessional support for that, such as opening your child's, lunch containers if they struggle with the fine motor aspect of that, or maybe you're bringing something that needs to be heated. One thing that you'll have to ask with any school is like, is there a place for a child to reheat their meal? Because I know a lot of our kids love chicken fingers and, warm sandwiches and things like that. So you do need to check in to see if that is an option at that school to have something heated. Otherwise, we'll have to come together as a team to kind of figure out what's the best option for lunch meals once that happens. I'm going to go through each of the placements. We kind of talked about that at the beginning, but just to go into more detail as we get further and further along with the placements. But again, general education plus placement, least restrictive in the continuum. They'll be placed in there without any supports or modifications. And this is what you would see as a typical or regular school placement. The next one is supports and or modifications, whether that be a one-to-one aid or a shared peer professional. Again, thinking about this in terms of the continuum of restrictiveness. To be in the setting with an aid is more restrictive than being in your special education without an aid to support the student. So they'll still be accessing general education, curriculum, environment, peers, but they need some level of supports and or modifications to ensure that they are able to do so safely. And then there's always that combination of general education and special education placement where they'll join that special general education classroom for particular activities, or maybe again, it's that subject matter such as math, English, social studies, science. They'll be placed in there without supports, or maybe they do need some supports to kind of help access that area. In addition, they could go in there just for those specials. Art, music, gym, lunch, recess also count as a special, even though, most activities don't happen during lunch and recess. It's usually free time and eating, but they will have access to a general education peers and area of the building in terms of eating in the lunchroom and access in the playground, just as any other general education student would. And then self-contained special education placement, again, this is what is termed within CPS as cluster programs. These are designed specifically for students requiring a significantly modified curriculum with moderate to intensive supports and a separate classroom from general education peers for a majority of the day. And the way that they define a majority of the day is over 61% of your day is going to be spent in that special education placement. How they get to that percentage is they add up all of the minutes on the IEP in terms of minutes that are served within the general education, as well as minutes that are served within the special education, and divide that by the total amount of minutes that would be provided per week at that school. Then they get that percentage of day that's spent in special education. And if it's larger than 61%, they more than likely would be assigned to a cluster program because they are spending a majority of their chunk of day outside of the general education classroom. This is also for kids who may need assistance with adaptive skills. So thinking about those functional living skills, putting their backpack away, putting on and off their coat, maybe hand washing, toileting. So kids that curriculum and things of that nature. So basically, they're removed from the general education setting and they're placed into a separate classroom. CPS has two different maps, and I will share this with you. This is from 2024, but I don't think it's been necessarily updated too much in terms of this doesn't apply anymore. But these are good things to kind of check out to see what programs for the clusters they offer. So the first one I'm going to show you is the moderate cluster program. And at the bottom, there's this key here that shows moderate primary, moderate intermediate, and then moderate upper. So moderate primary is your elementary schools, moderate intermediate is your middle school, junior highs, moderate upper is your high school. Some of them have both moderate intermediate and moderate upper, or maybe moderate primary, moderate intermediate, so that they go, have shared space in both of the age groups. CPS definitely for programs has a lot more to offer with regards to, I'm just gonna make that a little bit smaller so you can kind of see everything. With regards to the moderate section. So they have a lot more schools to offer. You could live down here, but maybe your child is, assigned to Nettle Horse up here for their cluster program. Again, this is also looking at IEPs. You may live over by Skinner, but maybe Skinner is unable to implement your child's IEP for some reason, and they need to go to Chopin. So this is just to kind of map out the different levels of schools that they have and the grades that they have with regards to moderate needs. There is also a separate map for your intensive programs. And as you notice, this gets a little bit smaller in terms of the school systems that are able to manage children that they have identified as having more intense needs, whether that's in their behaviors, their adaptive skills, or their academic functioning. These are kids that require much more further help and assistance with these needs. And again, the the little key at the bottom helps to identify which one is primary only, which one is intermediate, and then which is your upper. And then again, slicing that in half in terms of they do both primary and intermediate, or maybe intermediate and upper. But as you can see, there are, less schools that are able to assist with kids that have more intensive needs. You'll also notice, I'm going to pick Beard here just because it's the easiest to identify in quadrant one. Beard is also known for their moderate and their intensive. So you may have, and I think Farnsworth is also on there, you may have schools that are able to help with both in terms of both the, moderate and the intensive, which is good because in terms of continuum of less restrictiveness, your child could start with intensive skills, but maybe through their help and their guidance and everything that they're putting into your child through their curriculum, they're able to kind of shift and grow into a more moderate learner. So that's pretty nice in terms of, schools are able to offer dual to kind of help with future planning. All right. And again, I will share those PDF with you so that you guys have access to it when you're kind of looking around for, what potentially could be a school placement for your child. And then on the CPS website, they have all of that information in terms of what the school offers, what it looks like. You can look through the websites and things like that. But the map is nice because you can see if somebody was talking about Beard, you could be like, okay, Beard offers moderate and intensive services. Let me go to their website and kind of check out all the things that are offered at Beard. Therapeutic school placement is the step before you get to the most restrictive. But in terms of CPS, in terms of what's local, this would probably be the most restrictive access that a child could have in their IEP. These are non-public, private special education programs that provide educational, therapeutic, and/or residential services to their students with disabilities. There are a few places around that do offer residential placement as part of their therapeutic school package. Most of the students that are placed into these non-public programs have severe and possibly complicated educational and clinical needs that the IEP team has determined that no less restrictive environment or setting on the continuum of alternative placements is going to be appropriate within the home school district to meet the needs of the child. I used to work at Easter Seals for about 10 years, and that is a therapeutic school placement in the city of Chicago. It's a private, non-public special education program, and many of our children that we served there started between the ages of 3 to 21. That's licensed for. And many of the students there had severe behavior issues and concerns to the point that they were harming themselves or harming others, that it was determined that a school placement, even within their most intensive cluster program, was not going to be safe enough to ensure the safety of others, as well as to provide that therapeutic access to curriculum to help them gain the skills that they need to, graduate high school and move on to post-secondary placement, whatever that may look like for the child. Non-special education day programs are often called separate day schools or therapeutic day schools. Some examples within the Chicago area, like I said before, Easter Seals is one, Giant Steps is another, and Helping Hands is another. Those two are further out west in the suburbs area. There's GCFS, so even though it's called a Jewish school, children who are not affiliated with the Jewish religion are welcome to join there. There are others within the Chicago area as well as the suburban area. Generally, what happens if your child is being recommended to a therapeutic school placement, they will provide you with the names of those schools so that you can set up a tour to go and see those schools and have a better understanding of what they're able to offer and what your child may be, experiencing within that school, so that it can help you make the determination as to what school placement they will take for that therapeutic school. And then the last one, the most restrictive setting, is residential care or treatment facility. Our hope with any child is that we never have to get to this level of the most restrictive environment. We always want to start with the least restrictive as much as possible. And where you start really depends on your child. For one child, where they start, the least restrictive may be that therapeutic school placement, and then they make progress and they move to the second least, which would be a cluster program. Or maybe your child's, least restrictive is that cluster program. So again, even though it's talking about we want to put them into their least restrictive environment, we're looking at and weighing all the risks and benefits for each level on that continuum to make that determination as to what is the least restrictive for that child. The most restrictive, again, is that residential care and treatment facility. These are for the most severe in terms of behavioral and educational needs and require a much more intensive setting in order to help them make progress. It is a non-public setting, and this would be tuitioned out. So CPS would pay this facility just as they do for therapeutic schools. They would pay this facility to take this student on to be responsible for their IEP as well as their any home, situation that they would need. Because mostly when you're looking at residential care, you're also looking at the care of that child outside of school hours. This may also involve a student attending a school that's not in the state of Illinois, unfortunately. There are residential care facilities as well as treatment facilities within the state of Illinois, but if your child has been identified as having this intense of a need, generally what CPS does, and they do the same thing for therapeutic school, they hand them your IEP, your child's IEP, to have them determine whether or not they would be able to serve it. So for example, at ESR Seals, they would send us the IEP, we'd look it over, make sure that everything that's in that IEP is something that we are capable of implementing. We have the services to implement that IEP. Same thing for residential. That residential facility would receive that IEP, as well as, because they're being placed there for home services as well, information about what's going on at home, behavioral needs, educational needs, adaptive needs, to make sure that they are able to take that child on. And if we have exhausted all resources in Illinois and there are no residential facilities that are capable of handling this very special and specific need of this child, then they may look to place them out of state in order to ensure that the child is receiving the best care as possible. Obviously, for anybody, family, as well as for school districts, we want to try to keep kids in home in terms of not only in their physical home, but also within the state of Illinois, close to their family, so that they have that care and support, and so that you can visit and things like that and still play an active role in your child's life, even when they're in a residential care treatment facility. Again, the goal is with any of these settings is to eventually, try to get them into a lesser restrictive environment. The last thing that I'm going to cover is service delivery. So services, again, is looking at your speech, your OT, your PT, your social work, and they can be delivered in the following ways. Very similar to what we do at the academy in terms of pushing in. So maybe you have the OT come in while we're doing our handwriting group, or maybe they're pushing in during another fine motor activity. Maybe, PT is pushing into our gym time so they can work on some climbing and some stairs and things like that. This is something that you'll continue to see in the school. The school therapist may push in to, hold on, somebody's trying to come in. You may see the school services try to push into that classroom to help deliver those services. So same thing that we do here. Or they may pull out, which again basically means that your child is pulled out of their classroom and placed into a small therapeutic room to receive that services more one-on-one. So they can provide that individually, in which they pull them from that classroom and it's just them and that speech therapist working on anything speech related for their goals and services. Or they may do a small group where maybe these, 2 or 3 kids are all working on the same same speech goals and we want to bring them together as a group. Sometimes you'll see that with social work in terms of working on social interaction, play, some social emotional goals and things like that. Or maybe for small group, what we did previously at IEP Series is that we had speech and OT work together in a co-treat in a small group to do a cooking class, because it incorporates communication. It also incorporates some fine motor activities in terms of measuring and stirring and things like that. So sometimes you'll see even co-treats happening between speech and OT, or OT and PT, social work and speech. And then there's also consultation. Within the IEP, you have to indicate who you're doing your consultation with. So you need to have this consultation will be between, the nurse and the teacher, and this is what we'll be consulting about. So that is clear to everybody that's involved that as part of the IEP, not only is my child going to be receiving, individual or group, direct or indirect minutes for their services, they will also be receiving consultation in which the speech therapist will consult with the teacher to ensure that the child has access and is utilizing their communication device, and to make sure that the teacher knows how to use it, how to incorporate it into the activities that they're doing with the child, and how to prompt and help that child use that device more fluidly within the classroom. That's just one example of consultation that could happen. You could also have consultation between the nurse, where the nurse is consulting with the parents to best understand side effects, changes in health, what medications they're taking, are there any updates, and how best can we help you from a nursing perspective. So nurses will also write generally, consultative minutes in order for them to communicate and consult with the parents and family, but they will also provide that consultation minutes to the teacher to ensure, like, hey, how are they doing in class? Are you seeing any of the side effects, so that they can report that back to the parents. You also may hear that they say direct and indirect, and this is basically direct services are with the student, and indirect is more in terms of consultation with others. They need to, in the IEP, indicate how the minutes are going to be delivered. So sometimes you'll see 60 minutes per week direct, and this could be group and individual, or group or individual. Again, they have to determine how they're going to be delivering these services and how many minutes per week it's going to be delivered. Or maybe you'll see 15 minutes per month of indirect, which is consultation with the classroom teacher on this particular speech goal. There is a box on the IEPs which indicates, that this goal will be consultation with, the speech therapist or things like that, so that you can also see which goals they're supposed to be consulting on about your child. The school, in terms of minutes per week, oftentimes they usually go up to 60 minutes. Sometimes you may get them to go a little bit more in terms of providing speech or OT, up to 120, but it's very rare. Most of the time, you're going to see a 60-minute per week as an average across the board for clients in terms of implementing their speech, OT, PT, and social work goals. For more intensive kids, especially those who are at therapeutic schools who require more intensive services, you will see the minutes increase in terms of what's provided to them for their service delivery. Do know it's different from insurance base that we provide here. So insurance base, we may be providing 60 minutes per week, but we need to chunk that into one time. So the speech therapist may be seeing your child one time per week for that 60-minute period, and that's it. Whereas at the school, if it's written as 60 minutes per week, even if it's as group, individual, or anything of that nature, they could chunk that into smaller chunks. So maybe, for 15 minutes, I'm going to come and push into, this group atmosphere that you're doing for OT to work on, communication for asking for my turn. Or maybe it's a social skills group that you're working in and you want to have them utilize their device to say my turn, or, make compliments or comments about about the conversation and things like that. So you can take those minutes and spread it across the week to provide more pockets of more intense therapy versus meeting with them generally just for 60 minutes. That's generally up to the speech therapist as to how they feel would be the most beneficial for your child. But that is something I want to make note of in terms of differences between school and insurance-based services. As that insurance-based, you have to stick with that whole hour being spent with that child during that one time per week. Whereas at school, they have the flexibility to kind of implement the minutes how they best see fit. And then I want to go over a couple of different IEP forms. Let that load. And then I sent this presentation one other time in terms of how to read an IEP. That one's still loading. But this one's nice. It's by Equip for Equality, and it goes through section by section about how to read an IEP. Although it's kind of old, I think it was written back in 2021 or something of that nature, many of the laws and key terms and things like that still apply. And many of the way that the forms are written for IEPs that you'll see for CPS are still generally the same. One thing to know about a lot of IEPs is that they utilize drop-down menus. So let me see if I can pull up a page here. This one. Okay, accommodations. Let me see. Well, they don't have a good page for it, but the accommodations and modifications. That page generally has a drop-down menu where it's like, we'll use a token board or, we'll access a computer or something like that. It's not very individualized to the student. Like you have to choose which drop-down menu you want to include into the accommodations and modifications that would be individualized to that child. Like, Joey needs access to a computer, but Susie does not need access. So if Susie does not need access to a computer, I'm not going to click on that drop down. I'm going to make sure Joey has it. But one thing to note is that many times the language will say has access to communication device, has access to computer. What does that look like for the child? So ask those questions. Make sure that you're asking, how is this going to be implemented and how is this any different than any other child? I think that really puts the responsibility onto the school district when you ask those things of like, how does he know he has access to a computer? Is it provided during certain times of day, during certain activities? What if he requests it? Do you give him access to it? I mean, ideally, yes, because his IEP says we'll have access to a computer, but what if it's not time for a computer? Like, how do you, justify removing access to something that's written into the IEP? So there are things that when you're going through the accommodations and modifications, like frequent breaks. What does that look like? Breaks outside of the room, breaks in the room, how long, how often, extended time on assignments. How long does he have for extended time? Is it going across days? For those who are in, like for 504s, many times we'll see extended time on assignments can have up to, 2 extra days to complete a large paper that is larger than 8 pages or something like that. You just want to make sure that they're specifying as to what that accommodation and modification looks like so that it's clear how it's going to be implemented. And while there are, you can Google all of these accommodations and modifications for children with autism, and you'll come up with these long lists. And while those may be helpful, do know that your team is going to have to implement this. And we want to make sure that the accommodations and modifications that are being provided to the child are meaningful and individualized to help that child access that curriculum in that setting. And it's not just a long list because eventually the teacher's going to be like overwhelmed with the amount of accommodations modifications that they have to implement, and they're going to lose track of it. So although your child may need it, you want to think about what is the priority of these and what is the most like bang for your buck in terms of accommodations and modifications. And then I will share, oh, here we go. The ISB website, for as much as it's worth, does have all of the different IEP forms. It also comes in your language of choice, which again is required. They have to provide the IEP within your, native language. I'm going to choose English. Obviously, these like numbers don't really make sense to you, but each of the PDFs are written below as to what that form looks like. This I'm just including for you so you can kind of look at it to like, understand what it may mean or what it looks like so that when somebody says, what is the eligibility determination, you can pull it up and see, oh, this is exactly what it says. It says that, they're basically determined my child to have this disability, autism as the primary, and then another health impairment because they have an ADD diagnosis or ADHD diagnosis. That would be our secondary. Or maybe they have an intellectual disability. So again, all of these diagnoses are listed below that they would find them eligible for to indicate, the need for an IEP service. All right, that takes us back to the top of some questions. I'm going to pause the recording. Just to offer you guys a little